Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to my channel. And this is an educational channel. We look at different varieties of theories of everything. And eventually, hopefully, we'll get to the point where we can even kind of synthesize all the different ones and figure out that they're all saying the same thing, but using different nomenclatures, different languages. And today is the 318th video that we have done on the reciprocal system of theory from Mr. Dewey Bernard Larson. And Mr. Larson was born in 1898, and he was a World War I vet, and he then came back, and he was born in North Dakota, moved out to Oregon, and began a career there as an engineer eventually, and was dabbling with some different scientific problems. He was trying to make a little bit of a contribution to his field, but he stumbled across something that was much more profound than what he bargained for. But he answered the call, and he developed his ideas to the degree that they deserved. Not just a small contribution, but a monumental revolution. And he eventually, after many years of working it out, he put out his two fundamental postulates in the late 1950s. And the first of those postulates is by far the more important, and it basically says that we live in a universe that is composed entirely of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are more or less reciprocals of one another. They have the same qualities, and they do not exist independently, only together in motion. And they both have their coordinate aspects, meaning they come in 3 dimensions. And they both have their clock aspects, meaning that they progress in a scalar manner, meaning that they progress in no particular direction. So in time, that looks like a clock. The clock is always getting later and later and later and later. And in space, that looks like a balloon with dots on it that is expanding. All of the dots are moving farther and farther and farther apart. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. Clock space. And then space and time also come only in discrete units. There is a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time. And below that, you do not have either of those qualities. You have to have a full unit before you have anything. And if you have exactly 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, you have the speed of light, which is what Larson calls unit speed. And so in the reciprocal system, a universe of motion, a universe made entirely of motion, motion is the fundamental quantity. And so motion is the first thing that exists. So you have motion, this unit speed, before you have anything that is moving. You have to be able to kind of grok that in your head. You have motion before anything that would be moving. That kind of goes against the way that we're accustomed to thinking. And one of Larson's followers kind of put it that, for 3,000 years, we have seen space and time as really like the container of the universe. The action, the drama of the universe occurs on this stage, in this container of space-time. But in Larson's system, space-time is actually the contents of the universe, not just the container of the universe. It's not only the container, but it is all the things that are participating in the drama. Not only is the motion, but the thing is also motion. And so, it requires kind of a about face in our thinking about things. And so it's a little difficult to grasp because there's so many kind of unfamiliar concepts. But when you get used to Larson's theory, you can see how it's very, very self-consistent. He follows the same rules for everything, but those rules seem rather arbitrary when seen in a vacuum. When you see only him applying it in one area, it's like, where did he get that from? But then you see him applying it in another area. He's applying the same principles to atomic physics as he's applying to stars and galaxies. And so you can see how the system is self-consistent, but only once you've been exposed enough to it. Okay, now when you have that speed of light background, that really means that you have half of the universe that's moving faster than the speed of light, which goes against Einstein's dictum that said the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe and nothing moves faster than the speed of light. Einstein is only referring to the half of the universe that Larson calls the material sector, but the half that's called the cosmic sector is kind of ignored by legacy science. The good news is that the cosmic sector and the material sector are identical in general, except that they are reciprocals of each other. So all you have to do to figure out what's going on in the cosmic sector is to invert the roles of space and time. So in the material sector, you have coordinate space, 3 dimensions of space, and clock time. The clock is always progressing, getting later and later and later. But in the cosmic sector, you have 3 dimensions of space. 3 dimensions of time, coordinate time. And you have clock space. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. So that is kind of the relationships between those two sectors. Now, what we're looking at today is the second installment of reading an article from Larson. And this article is called Reference Systems. And again, so the reference system that he's referring to, that the universe actually conforms to, is this outward at the speed of light in all directions. He calls that the progression of the natural reference system. He refers to it as the natural reference system, the reference system that the universe actually conforms to. That is not to be confused with the absolute reference system, which Larson says does not exist. There is no absolute reference system. Your reference system is based upon what you choose. In the legacy science, the absolute reference system is utter stillness. It is from zero. You measure all your motions from zero. In the reciprocal system, with the natural reference system, you're measuring things from the speed of light. Okay, so that is that's some of what he talked about here in the first installment. So now we're going to look at today's installment. So if you want to go back and start this paper at the beginning, you want to watch yesterday's video. Okay. The concept of an expanding system of reference is applicable only to scalar motion. Again, scalar motion is a motion with a magnitude but no direction, no specific direction, just like spots on an expanding balloon. All of them are moving away from each other. Okay, it is unfamiliar the expanding system of reference, is unfamiliar because the existence of inherently scalar motion was not recognized prior to the development of the reciprocal system, notwithstanding the fact that motions such as those of spots on an expanding balloon are obviously different in kind from ordinary vectorial motions. A reference system, just to go back, a vectorial motion is a motion that has a direction. A vector is like an arrow. There is a direction of a vectorial motion. So the scalar motion of the expanding balloon is different in kind from ordinary vectorial motion. A reference system for scalar motion in a three-dimensional universe necessarily takes the form of a sphere. As the imputed direction of a scalar motion in such a universe is determined by chance, an object which has moved a scalar distance from its point of origin during a certain interval will be found somewhere on the surface of a sphere of radius d. For the purpose of explaining the relation of such a reference system to the more familiar types, let us assume an object A to be motionless. A sphere centered at A then constitutes a stationary system of reference. Magnitudes in which can, of course, be expressed either in polar or rectangular coordinates. A sphere centered at object B, which is not moving relative to A, is part of the same reference system. A sphere centered at object C, which is in motion relative to A, is another reference system of the same kind. However, if the sphere centered at A is assumed the word is assured, but I'm not sure which he means, assumed or assured. If the sphere centered at A is assumed to be expanding at rate x, this constitutes a reference system of a different kind, a moving system. In the special case where the rate of expansion x is unity, 1 unit of space per 1 unit of time, we have the natural moving system, the reference system to which the basic units of the universe actually conform. If an expanding sphere of this kind is centered at object B instead of object A, it is another part of the natural system. However, both A and B can occupy positions in the same stationary reference system only if they are moving inward gravitationally. For all practical purposes, therefore, it can be considered that a separate system of reference is centered at B. It is true that all points in reference system B are moving outward from A, but this outward motion is counterbalanced by the inward gravitational motion of equal magnitude, so that the only effective ratio of photons emitted from B is the motion outward from so that the only effective motion of photons emitted from B is the motion outward from B. Generalizing the principle brought out in the foregoing paragraphs, we may say that scalar motion can be represented in a stationary three-dimensional system of reference only if reference points are defined. So you're basically defining a reference point by saying that this point here is motionless. This is the point that's motionless. That's how you put a scalar motion into a reference system. The limitation on our ability to represent motion in a fixed coordinate system may be annoying, but if we want to understand the physical universe, we will have to take it as it is. We cannot force it to conform to what we think it ought to be or what we find convenient. The discovery that the physical universe transcends the limitations of our usual reference systems is one of the most significant of the results that have been obtained from the development of the reciprocal system of theory. It is now clear that this universe cannot be forced into the mold that previous physical theories have prepared for it. There is no valid reason why physical actions must be limited to those events and those phenomena that can be represented in the reference systems that the human race is capable of constructing. And the finding of the reciprocal system is that it is not so limited. The inability to deal with scalar motion on the same basis as vectorial motion is only one of a number of instances where the universe refuses to stay within the boundaries of what is convenient for the human investigator. Inability to represent change of position in time in a spatial reference system is another case of the same kind. I'm continually receiving letters from individuals who say that they need help because they are having difficulty in drawing a diagram to represent some motion in which change of position in time is involved. According to the theoretical findings, I cannot give any help in these cases because motion in time cannot be represented in a spatial diagram. We are able to represent low-speed motion in such a diagram because no significant change of relative position in time is involved. But as soon as the speed is great enough to introduce such a change, that's basically like a relativistic change, as Einstein would call it, where, the space clock is altered or the time clock is altered by a relativistic, so if the speed is great enough to introduce such a change, the spatial diagram can no longer represent the motion accurately. So if you have relativistic effects, then you no longer are able to fit into the reference system. Einstein used the concept of curved space and such like to compensate for that shortcoming of the reference system. This is not something that is peculiar to the reciprocal system. The reason for the difficulty at high speeds was unknown prior to the development of this new theoretical system, but its existence has long been recognized. It is a matter of fact that has to be faced regardless of what physical theory is accepted. In order to understand just what is involved, it should be realized that a diagram or graphical representation of a motion does not give us a true picture of that motion unless the spatial positions of the moving object, as shown in the reference system, are consistent with the speeds. For instance, if the distance between A and B increases by x in time t, then the speed must be x over t. Otherwise, the motion is not correctly represented. But no spatial reference system can maintain this kind of consistency in representing high-speed motion. The two-photon case that I have frequently discussed in my publications demonstrates this point. In this illustration, we assume two photons, A and B, emitted simultaneously from an object O in opposite directions. At the end of 1 unit of clock time, A and B are separated by 2 units of distance, and x over t equals 2 over 1 equals 2. But experiments show that the speed of A relative to B is only 1. So, if you think about it logically, you would assume that they would be separate. They're separated by 2 units of distance. So the experiments show that the speed is still 1 as opposed to 2. Clearly, either the distance entering into the determination of the speed differs from that measured by the reference system, or the time differs from the uniform rate of progression that has to be assumed in order to make it possible to represent motion in a spatial coordinate system. In either case, the spatial reference system is not capable of representing the motion accurately. Current physical theory, based on Einstein's assumptions, simply says that the coordinate positions have no meaning at high speeds. As expressed by Moeller, quote, "In accelerated systems of reference, the spatial and temporal coordinates thus lose every physical significance. They simply represent a certain arbitrary but unambiguous numbering of the physical events." Those who insist that we should be able to represent every motion by a spatial diagram are demanding something that has long been known to be impossible. Perhaps someday a device may be invented whereby change of position in 3 dimensions of space and change of position in 3 dimensions of time can be accurately represented in a diagram that can be comprehended by the human mind. In the meantime, we will simply have to recognize that some natural phenomena are not amenable to our cherished diagrammatic modes of representation, regardless of what kind of a theory we may use in our attempt to understand them. The only difference between the reciprocal system and other theories, so far as this point is concerned, is that this new theoretical system has clearly identified the phenomena that the conventional systems of reference are unable to handle, including some phenomena such as scalar motion that have heretofore been overlooked, largely because of the tendency to insist that nature must conform to what the human theorists find convenient. There is no good reason, however, why we should be disconcerted because nature refuses to make things easy for us. If we start with the basic units of motion and build the possible combinations of these units step by step in accordance with the rules specified in the fundamental postulates of the reciprocal system, we define the physical universe, the universe of motion, in all of its detail. The universe, as thus defined, is rational, logical, and understandable. The fact that some of its magnitudes cannot be represented graphically in the manner to which scientists have been accustomed merely indicates that previous ideas as to the basic nature of these magnitudes are erroneous. All right, that is the end of that paper. Basically, you need 3 dimensions of space to represent a 1-dimensional scalar motion. there are 3 dimensions of motion, or 3 dimensions of scalar motion. So there are 2 dimensions of scalar motion that cannot be represented in a spatial reference system. And that's all there is to it. And so you have to be able to accept that, and you have to be able to make accommodations in a different, you have to make arrangements to compensate for that, to figure out how you can do science, even though these things do not fit into your reference system. And now it is relevant to look at Larson's second postulate, which says that the universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its primary magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. Now, so perhaps if we went to a non-Euclidean geometry, something other than x, y, z coordinates, perhaps we could accommodate this scalar, 3 dimensions of scalar motion. And I know that people have tried that. And one of Larson's disciples, the late Dr. Bruce Perret, has taken the Larson's second postulate to task. And he believes that we need to get rid of the Euclidean geometry part there. And he substitutes projective geometry for Euclidean geometry. Euclidean geometry is actually just a subset of projective geometry. For Perret, there is a kind of a geometrical cascade from the general to the specific. You start with the projective geometry, and then you move to affine geometry, and then you move to metric geometry, and then finally you move to Euclidean geometry. And he concedes that there may be one or more other geometries in that cascade in the middle there someplace. But Euclidean geometry is not incorrect, but it is just a small part of this whole projective geometrical system. So, that is one approach at least. Larson was aware of non-Euclidean geometries, but he felt that it was not worth it because they were just as complicated as, just basically assuming that Euclidean geometry doesn't do the job, and that you need to use different things to be able to come up with answers. Even though you might not be able to represent the motion in the reference system, you can still do calculations. And basically if you're you can add 2 scalar motions. You end up just taking the sum of things as opposed to being able to kind of integrate them. We will see more about this as we go along. Now tomorrow, I think we're going to start with this a short paper here that is called the interregional ratio. And I've mentioned this before, but the interregional ratio is basically the amount of information that is lost in the translation from when you're measuring from one sector of the universe to another sector. So when you're kind of changing reference systems, reference frames, you're losing a lot of the information. Maybe another term would be, instead of interregional ratio, you could use, possibilities or eigenstates, potentialities. But Larson uses the term interregional ratio, and we will kind of look at how he derives the interregional ratio, what it means, and there are actually several different interregional ratios depending on what you're measuring, if it's a subatomic particle or if it's an atom or what. So we'll get into that tomorrow, but thanks for tuning in today and have a great day.